The Ezhavas are a community with origins in the region of India presently known as Kerala. They are also known as Ilhava, Arava, Izhava and Erava in the south of the region, as Chovas, Chokons and Chogons in Central Travancore, and as Thiyyas, Tiyyas and Theeyas in the Malabar region. Some are also known as Thandan, which has caused administrative difficulties due to the presence of a distinct caste of Thandan in the same region. The Malabar Thiyya group have claimed a higher ranking in the Hindu caste system than do the others, although from the perspective of the colonial and subsequent administrations they were treated as being of similar rank, as well as being agricultural laborers, small cultivators, toddy tappers and liquor businessmen. Some Ezhavas were also involved in weaving and some practiced Ayurveda. Ezhava dynasties such as the Aaroamal also existed in Kerala. The Chovas, a warrior section within the community, were part of the militias of local chieftains and kings. There were also renowned Kalari Payattu experts among Chovas. Legend. According to legend and some Malayalam folk songs, the Ezhavas were the progeny of 4 bachelors that the king of Ceylon sent to Kerala at the request of the Chera king Bhaskara Ravivarma, in the 1st century CE. These men were sent, ostensibly, to set up coconut farming in Kerala. Another version of the story says that the Sri Lankan king sent 8 martial families to Kerala at the request of a Chera king to quell a civil war that had erupted in Kerala against him. Etymology. Dispute between Thiyya and Ezhava. Some in the Thiyya community have objected to being treated as Ezhava by the government of Kerala. They have campaigned for the right to record themselves as Thiyya rather than as Ezhava when applying for official posts and other jobs allocated under India's system of positive discrimination. They claim that the stance of the government is contrary to a principle established by the Supreme Court of India relating to a dispute involving communities who were neither Ezhava nor Thiyya. The Thiyya Mahasabha has also opposed the SNDP's use of the Thiyya name at an event. In February 2013, a recently formed Thiyya Mahasabha objected to the SNDP treating Ezhavas and Thiyyas as one group, rather than recognizing the Thiyyas in Malabar as being distinct. The SNDP was at the time attempting to increase its relatively weak influence in northern Kerala, where the politics of identity play a lesser role than those of class, and the Communist Party of India has historically been a significant organization. Past occupations. The social anthropologists Philippa and Caroline Ozella say that the Ezhavas consisted in the mid-19th century of a small land-owning untitled elite and a large mass of landless and small tenants who were largely illiterate, considered untouchable, and who eked out a living by manual labor and petty trade. Aaroamal, another social anthropologist and himself a member of the caste, noted the mythical belief that the Ezhava brought coconut palms to Kerala when they moved from Sri Lanka. The traditional occupation, or avokasam, was tending to and tapping the sap of such palms. This activity is sometimes erroneously referred to as toddy tapping, toddy being a liquor manufactured from the sap. Arak was another liquor produced from the palms, as was jaggery. In reality, most Ezhavas were agricultural laborers and small-time cultivators, with a substantial number diverging into the production of coir products, such as coconut mats for flooring. From towards the end of the 19th century, the coastal town of Alleppey became the center of such manufacture and was mostly controlled by Ezhavas, although the lucrative export markets were accessible only through European traders, who monopolized the required equipment. A boom in trade for these manufactured goods after World War I led to a unique situation in 20th century Kerala whereby there was a shortage of labor, which attracted still more Ezhavas to the industry from outlying rural areas. The Great Depression impacted in particular on the export trade, causing a reduction in price and in wages even though production increased, with the consequence that during the 1930s many Ezhava families found themselves to be in dire financial circumstances. Some Ezhavas were involved in weaving and ship-making. Martial traditions. Many were employed as guards or sentinels in the palaces of Kochi and Travancore. Syrian Christians of Kerala, who were privileged in the pre-colonial period to have their own private armies, recruited Ezhava members due in part to this tradition. Chokons, a subgroup of the Thiyyas, considered themselves to be warriors and became known as the Chovas. The Vadak and Patakal ballads describe Chovas as forming the militia of local chieftains and kings, but the title was also given to experts of culinary too, medicine and traditional toxicology. Some Ezhavas had an extensive knowledge of the medicinal value of plants passed to them by their ancestors. Known as Vaidyas, these people acted as physicians. Tiyyas was probably the best-known Ezhava physician who directly influenced the classification of Hortus Malabaricus in the 17th century. Tiyyas' texts were written in the Kolashuthu script that Ezhava castes used, for they were prevented from learning the more Sanskritized Aaroamal script, which was the preserve of the upper castes. Some Ezhavas practiced Ayurvedic medicine. Culture. Akali. Literally, Akali means the play of the 5 sets. This was a ritualistic art form performed in almost all important temples of Kerala. Today it is found in central Kerala. This is also known as Pandavakali, which means the play of the Pandavas, and is performed by Asari, Musari, Karuvan, Thatin and Kalasari communities. This ritualistic dance is performed beneath a decorated pandal with an Ilhava at its center. The 5 or more performers with the leader called Cleashan enter the performance area after a ritualistic bath, with sandalwood paste over the foreheads, dressed in white dhoti, and with a towel wrapped around the heads. Arjuna and Rtam. Arjuna and Rtam, a male Pili Tukam, is a ritual art performed by men of Ezhava community and is prevalent in the Bhagavathi temples of South Kerala, mainly in Kollam, Alapura and Kottayam districts. Arjuna en rhythm is also called male Pili Thukam, as the costume includes a characteristic garment made of male Pili. This garment is worn around the waist in a similar fashion as the Ukita of Kathakali. The various dance movements are closely similar to Kalaripayattu techniques. The performers have the faces painted green and wear distinctive headgears. The all-night performance of the dance form is usually presented solo or in pairs. Makachuttu. Makachuttu art is popular among Ezhavas in Tiruvananthapuram and Kairayankai taluks and in Kilimanur, Pasauyakunamal and Thathathumala regions. In this, a group of 8 performers, 2 each, twin around each other like serpents and rise up battling with sticks. The techniques are repeated several times. Sandalwood paste on the forehead, a red towel round the head, red silk around the waist and bells round the ankles form the costume. This is a combination of snake worship and Kalaripayattu. Purakali. Purakali is a folk dance prevalent among the Ezhavas of Malabar, usually performed in Bhagavathi temples as a ritual offering during the month of Meenam. Purakali requires specially trained and highly experienced dancers, trained in Kalaripayattu, a system of physical exercise formerly in vogue in Kerala. Standing round a traditional lamp, the performers dance in 18 different stages and rhythms, each phase called a niram. Tayam Kaliyatam. In northern Kerala, Tayam is a popular ritual dance. This particular dance form is also known as Kaliyatam. The main deities of Ezhavas include Vayanatu Kulavan, Katavan of Haran, Pumarutan and Muttapan. Customs. Ezhavas adopted different patterns of behavior in family system across Kerala. Those living in southern Travancore tended to meld the different practices that existed in the other parts of Kerala. The family arrangements of northern Malabar were matrilineal with patrilocal property arrangements, whereas in northern Travancore they were matrilineal but usually matrilocal in their arrangements for property. Southern Malabar saw a patrilineal system but partible property. These arrangements were reformed by legislation for Malabar in 1925 and for Travancore in 1933. The process of reform was more easily achieved for the Ezhavas than it was for the Nayars, another Hindu caste in Kerala who adopted matrilineal arrangements. The situation for the Nayars was complicated by a traditional matrilocal form of living called Taravadu and by the usually much higher degree of property ownership. Spiritual and social movements. Some Thiyyas converted to Islam from around the 9th century due to the influence of Arab traders. These people, and other Muslim converts in the region, are now known as Mapilas. A sizable part of the Ezhava community, especially in Central Travancore and in the high ranges, embraced Christianity during the British rule, due to caste-based discrimination. In Kannur, Protestant missions started working in the first half of the 19th century, notably the Basel German Evangelical Mission. Most of the converts were from the Thiyya community. The Congregationalist London Missionary Society and the Anglican Church Mission Society were also prominent in the movement for religious conversion, having established presences in the Travancore region in the early 19th century. The lowly status of the Ezhava meant that, as Thomas Nossiter has commented, they had little to lose and much to gain by the economic and social changes of the 19th and 20th centuries. They sought the right to be treated as worthy of an English education and for jobs in government administration to be open to them. An early Ezhava campaigner and their political father, according to Riti Lucas, was Padmanabhan Palpu. In 1896, he organized a petition of 13,176 signatories that was submitted to the Maharaja of the princely state of Travancore, asking for government recognition of the Ezhava's right to work in public administration and to have access to formal education. Around this time, nearly 93% of the caste members were illiterate. The upper caste Hindus of the state prevailed upon the Maharaja not to concede the request. The outcome not looking to be promising, the Ezhava leadership threatened that they would convert from Hinduism en masse, rather than stay as helots of Hindu society. C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer, realizing the imminent danger, prompted the Maharaja to issue to the temple entry proclamation, which abolished the ban on lower caste people from entering Hindu temples in the state of Travancore. Stephen Wilkinson says that proclamation was passed because the government was frightened by the Ezhava threat of conversion to Christianity. Eventually, in 1903, a small group of Ezhavas, led by Palpu, established Sree Narayana Dharma Paripalin Yogam, the first caste association in the region. This was named after Narayana Guru, who had established an ashram from where he preached his message of one caste, one religion, one God, and a Sanskritized version of the Victorian concept of self-help. His influence locally has been compared to that of Swami Vivekananda. One of the initial aims of the SNDP was to campaign for the removal of the restrictions on school entry, but even after those legal barriers to education were removed, it was uncommon in practice for Ezhavas to be admitted to government schools. Thus, the campaign shifted to providing schools operated by the community itself. The organization attracted support in Travancore, but similar bodies in Kochi were less successful. In Malabar, which unlike Kochi and Travancore was under direct British control, the Thiyyas showed little interest in such bodies because they did not suffer the educational and employment discrimination found elsewhere, nor indeed were the disadvantages that they did experience strictly a consequence of caste alone. The Ezhavas were not immune to being manipulated by other people for political purposes. The Vaikom Satyagraha of 1924–1925 was a failed attempt to use the Izhava access to roads around temples in order to revive the fortunes of Congress, orchestrated by T.K. Madhavan, a revolutionary and civil rights activist, and with the famous temple at Vaikom as the focal point. Although it failed in its stated aim of achieving access, the Satyagraha did succeed in voicing a radical rhetoric, according to Nosita. During this movement, a few Akalis, an order of armed Sikhs, came to Vaikom in support of the demonstrators. After the eventual passing of the temple entry proclamation, some of the Akalis remained. They attracted some Ezhava youth to the concepts of the Sikhism, resulting in Ezhava conversions to Sikhism. The success of the SNDP in improving the lot of Ezhavas has been questioned. Membership had reached 50,000 by 1928 and 60,000 by 1974, but Nosita notes that, for the Vaikom Satyagraha onwards, the SNDP had stirred the ordinary Ezhava without materially improving his position. The division in the 1920s of 60,000 acres of properties previously held by substantial landowners saw the majority of Ezhava beneficiaries receive less than 1 acre each, although 2% of them took at least 40% of the available land. There was subsequently a radicalization and much political infighting within the leadership as a consequence of the effects of the Great Depression on the choir industry, but the general notion of self-help was not easy to achieve in a primarily agricultural environment. The Victorian concept presumed an industrialized economy. The organization lost members to various other groups, including the communist movement, and it was not until the 1950s that it reinvented itself as a pressure group and provider of educational opportunities along the lines of the Nair Service Society. Just as the NSS briefly formed the National Democratic Party in the 1970s in an attempt directly to enter the political arena, so too in 1972 the SNDP formed the Social Revolutionary Party. Position in society. Historical. The Ezhava community, up until the turn of the century, were an oppressed people. They were not to be touched or seen by upper caste Hindus. Ezhava men and women were forced to go bare-chested so that upper caste passers-by could quickly recognize them, avoid looking at them, and avoid being spiritually polluted. Although Ezhavas performed the works-associated Sudravana, they were considered as Ezhavana by the Nambudiri Brahmins, who formed the Hindu clergy and ritual ruling elite in late medieval Kerala. Kathleen Goff says that the Thiyyas of Central Travancore were historically the highest ranking of the higher polluting castes, a group whose other constituents included Kanazans and various artisanal castes, and who were all superior in status to the lower polluting castes, such as the Pulayas and Parayas, the Nairs, and, where applicable, the Mapilas, ranked socially and richly higher than the polluting castes. Modern. For the study-based Principia around one village and published in 2000, Theozelas noted that the movements of the late 19th and 20th century brought about considerable change change for the Ezhavas, with access to jobs, education and the right to vote, all assisting in creating an identity based more on class than caste. Although the stigmatic label of a Varna remained despite gaining the right of access to temples. Despite the persecution faced before the early 20th century, the Ezhavas climbed the caste ladder to backward status, and have prospered economically.